Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. It is Thursday evening, the 11th of April, 2019. Tonight's topic, report, silver demand shifts to jewelry and silverware. We're going to go through the latest update from the Silver Institute. We're going to take a look at silver supply and demand and some recent trends and a decade-long trend. As you can see, silver demand shifting to jewelry and silverware. We're also going to talk about scrap silver as well and the impact on that on supply. Also, we've got an ECB rate decision. We've got Larry Kudlow talking about interest rates. We're going to do somewhat of an in-depth analysis on Bill Barr, the Attorney General's testimony to both the Congress and the Senate the past couple of days. Got the latest on Brexit, Julian Assange's arrest and what it means. And we've got a good Moronica for you tonight, a little later on in the program, and a mug update. SD Bullion entering the mug space. Which one is going to win in the mug wars? All right, well, let's get into our pricing of the markets today. It was a pretty uneventful day in the equity markets, but a very eventful day in the gold and silver markets. To the downside, also to the downside in the crypto markets. So let's take a look. The Dow Jones closed at 26,143, down just 14 points, pretty much flat. Same with the NASDAQ. NASDAQ was essentially flat as well. The down 0.21% or down 16 points to 79.47. And the S&P 500 was as flat can be, unchanged at 2,888. Now, this is surprising because we had a few pronouncements. We also had a pronouncement on a gold standard from Secretary Treasury Munchkin, whatever you pronounce his name. We're going to get to that in a minute, too. But let's take a look at the gold and silver price. And a couple of gold and silver stories came up the past couple of days. The gold price down, finally down again below 1,300. Closed at 1292. Opened the day above 1,300. Went up a little bit at one point during the day, was all the way down at $12.89, ended up being down $15. $15 down. That is a 1.18% decrease in the price of gold. In the aftermarkets, it's pretty much where it left off. Let's take a look at silver. Silver took a clobbering, down 1.72%, or down 26 cents. Opened the day above 15. It was at 15.21. Went up a little bit to 15.23. Then went all the way down to 14.89 and closed at 14.95. And that is where it sits at the moment. And what did that do for the unsustainable, out of whack gold-silver ratio that this guy is talking about? Well, it went up a little bit more. And we're going to give you some more data tonight on why that gold-silver ratio is where it is. Not is what it is, but is where it is. And it rose to 86.47. And a lot of your silver pumpers are scratching their heads and trying to convince everyone silver is rarer than gold. And silver has so many uses in our lives. It is used in yoga pants, and many are finding more uses for it every day. You'll hear all that nonsense. I'm going to show you the data, and then it'll start to make sense to you. See, if you listen to a narrative without facts, then the narrative makes sense to you. If you listen to facts and you're not married to the narrative, well, then the facts start to make more sense to you than the narrative. We're going to cover that when we get to the Bill Barr story as well. The idea, once you're married to a narrative, it's very, very hard to see something else. All right, but you can see here the gold-silver ratio, no surprise, still at 86.47 to 1. And again, I don't see that coming down significantly unless one of two things happen. One, gold takes off because of some type of monetary demand, investment demand, gets a solid bull run going, and then people start looking at silver, and then silver starts to move up. Or silver has its own commodity rush, where there is some increased demand for silver for whatever reason, whether it's electronics, whether it is for solar energy, or whatever reason it might be, then you can see silver moving up on a commodity surge. But we're not seeing any evidence of that. Bottlenecks either in supply or any potential Russian demand. And we're going to talk about solar energy too. When we look at these numbers, it's actually down, silver demand for solar in 2018 versus 2017. Something the silver pumpers are not going to tell you, but I'll show you all this a little later on in the program. Let's see what other gold and silver stories we had for today. There's a nice gold find. I think it was in Israel, Northern Africa, not Israel. No, archaeologists in Israel unearthed the Apollonia National Park hoard. They were 108 gold coins from North Africa. They were from a caliphate, and then they were brought back. They were found in Israel, and they are medieval coins. Very nice. Cut off again there, but we're back. Yeah, we're back. We were talking about those coins found throughout the ancient world. They're constantly finding Viking silver, Roman gold, all throughout the ancient world, Northern Africa, the Near East, and they even find ancient coins along the Silk Road, all throughout Europe, Northern Europe. They're always finding them. But this is something we've talked about before. South African gold output has its longest losing streak since 2009. Now, South Africa, I believe, is not even in the top 10 anymore of gold-producing nations. South Africa was once of the utmost geopolitical significance because it effectively provided the Western world and the Bretton Woods gold standard with the basic supply of gold to back currency. And I see some similarities between South Africa and Saudi Arabia. We've talked about this in the past. We're not going to get into it tonight, but this concept of the petrodollar. Saudi Arabia is becoming less important as a result of its eventually declining oil reserves. But more importantly, its declining oil reserves versus the increasing U.S. oil reserves. So you may see a different geopolitical significance attached to Saudi Arabia, and that's why Saudi Arabia is also making moves to try to adjust its economy into other things like high tech. But South African gold, longest losing streak since 2009. Gold production shrunk for the 17th month in February. The other thing about South African gold mining is not only have they stripped the country of most of its gold, but currently the production that they have is unprofitable. I've seen statistics where many of the major gold miners will have mines with their all-in sustaining costs between $800, $900, $1,000, $1,200. Some of the South African mines are just keeping running, and some of their production all-in sustaining costs are $2,900 per ounce. So South Africa no longer a big gold-producing nation. And finally, Venezuela looking to cash in about 8 tons of its gold from central banks, and they look like they're going to sell that gold. All right, let's take a look over at we got a lot of crypto stories. Now let's just take a quick look at the prices. Bit of a sell-off the past 36 hours. There had been a mini, it looked like a blow-off top. Bitcoin went all the way up to 5,500 and then immediately turned around and went down to about 4,900. And currently, over the last 24 hours, it's at 5,048. And that's down less than 5% to 4.81. It was the altcoins that got hit harder. They also had a major run up prior to the dump down. Ethereum at 165, down 7%. Litecoin 78.63, down 11.18%. That had risen to like $94. And Bitcoin Cash had been at up to $322 again. Currently at 269, down 11 points. All right, let's take a look at some of the crypto stories. Coinbase has come out with a new Visa debit card, and with that debit card, it's available now in the United Kingdom. They plan to add it in other countries in Europe. There's always been problems with these types of cards. Gold Money tried to do one in the United States. They haven't been able to get these backed cards with some type of asset where you can then spend the asset through the Visa system. But the UK now has approved a Visa debit card, and you can use, I believe, Bitcoin, Litecoin, in, I believe, Ethereum and Ripple. Yes, so Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, or XRP, Litecoin, and you can use that as reported here in Forbes. There's a picture of that card, and you spend it just like cash. A lot of people don't understand the mechanism behind. They say that you cannot use Bitcoin or these cryptocurrencies as payment because they're too volatile, and that's correct if you're going to use them directly as payment. But for the most part, when people or companies or corporations, and even Smaulgld at one point, I used to run whatever donations I got from Bitcoin or Litecoin through a payment processor. And what the payment processor does is you set the price of the product that you want. And let's say you're going to sell something for $12.98. You then, in your wallet, you type in $12.98, and it converts to the then equivalent amount of Bitcoin or Litecoin or whatever cryptocurrency. You hit send, and that amount of Bitcoin or Litecoin, let's make it easy. Let's say that when Litecoin was $22, you buy something for $21. You type in $21. It says you owe 0.97 Bitcoin. The payment processor then accepts the 0.97 Litecoin and immediately converts it into the $22. The $22 is then sent to the merchant with a minor fee taken off, not a 2 or 3% fee, but something much lower. Now you say, well, okay, that's great for the merchant and that is great for the person paying, but what if the price of the Bitcoin goes up or down? Well, then the processor is going to get screwed. No, what the way a payment processor works is they have to set up almost like an exchange. Well, it's not like it is. It's like an exchange. They then immediately have buyers on the other side of the coins that are being sold to them by the person who's paying for goods, for which the payment processor is going to take that Litecoin, convert it into dollars, send it to the merchant. Now, immediately, what should happen in a properly run payment processing system is the payment processor is now going to immediately on-sell that Litecoin on an exchange. Now, Coinbase has their own exchange, so when they do payment processing, that coin goes right back into the exchange, and probably there's someone right there on the other side willing to buy that and a bunch of others that have been processed right away. And then they make money selling that Litecoin to somebody who's looking to buy it on the exchange. So they make money two ways, and they're not stuck holding any coins. Now, if they want, but it wouldn't be prudent, wouldn't do it, wouldn't advise it, 1,000 points of light, they wouldn't do that because then they're stuck with the risk. And Coinbase is not in the hodl space. They're in there to shave small amounts off of large amounts of processes, large amounts of processing, large amounts of transactions. They're not there to accumulate Litecoin or Bitcoin. Now, they can if they want, but chances are that's an easy way of going out of business, because if you bring in your cryptocurrencies and you don't exchange them into fiat and you have fiat obligations, you can't just say, I'm going to sit on this and wait till it goes back up. So that's how these things work. And that is why it is not that important that Bitcoin or Litecoin prices actually stabilize, because people are willing to buy them for the potential upside. But also, unlike holding on to other appreciating assets, they can be converted immediately into fiat. Now, you can do the same thing with gold. As I mentioned, you have a gold money credit card. You can do the same thing. And this makes it easier to transact in gold. It's just that the other thing that you can do with the cryptocurrencies is you don't even need the Visa card. But the reason the Visa card works, many merchants don't have payment processing set up, meaning they have not set up a BitPay account. They have not set up a Coinbase account, but they all have Visa. So this makes it easier for them to, quote, accept Bitcoin via Visa. So they're using the Coinbase card. And this concept ties into what I've been saying for years now, is I do not believe that Bitcoin and Litecoin are going to be some alternative system, anarcho-capitalist type of thing where It's outside the system. Be your own central bank. I also say I disagree with the people who say that the governments are going to shut it down. Not when it's, I believe, and it looks like it's heading in this direction. It's going to be, and is being, wrapped into the payment systems. I mean, you can't get more into the payment system than Visa. And if you have cryptocurrencies going through traditional payment processing, well, then they're part of the system. They're no threat to it whatsoever. On the one hand, the people are saying they're going to shut it down. And then for the naysayers to say it's too volatile to be a currency, it's not. It may be too volatile as an investment, and that will scare people away because it's speculative. I understand that. But for those who have it, and if a lot of people, when it goes up a bit, they then sell some, they buy stuff. That's in effect selling the cryptocurrencies. All right, let's see what else we got in the news. I think here's another picture of it. No, we already saw that one. Okay. What else do we have? Fidelity and back. Now, Fidelity launched a cryptocurrency digital asset trading platform and storage facilities for institutional investors. That's already off the ground. They haven't divulged any financials other than saying they had a good number of initial clients and a lot of interest, but they haven't disclosed how much they have under custody and what their trading looks like. Now, Backed is not yet out yet. That is the one that is a cryptocurrency Bitcoin physically settled futures exchange that is expected to be launched by Microsoft, Starbucks, and Boston Consulting Group and the New York Stock Exchange, or the owner of the New York Stock Exchange, Intercontinental Exchange, ICE. And they have been making acquisitions. They don't yet have their regulatory stuff in place. They expect to get it this year, and they're going to be sponsoring Consensus, and they're hiring people from PayPal and other top institutions. So there's a lot of money behind Backed. A lot of people think that's going to be a big deal. I think the idea that you can actually, instead of cash settling futures, collect the Bitcoin, put it into their storage, withdraw it from the storage, is probably more attractive to institutions than just trading price on the COMEX exchanges or even an ETF where you probably don't have access to the Bitcoin. And by the way, there's not yet been a Bitcoin ETF that's been approved. There's two pending, one from Bitwise and the other from the CBO group and VanEck. So those both may come online this year or maybe not. But an investment, happens every day in the space. Is another reason why I said there's just so much money pouring in. It has nothing to do with whether the price of the cryptocurrencies are going up or go down. But here's one. Crypto Strike raises $14 million so you can buy coffee with Bitcoin. And this is a payment startup, same thing, using funds from a private token sale to make shopping with Bitcoin at bricks and mortar stores a reality. So there's a lot of money involved in this. And this also ties into my analogy that the reason Netflix dethroned Blockbuster wasn't because they had a superior product. It wasn't because they had streaming. They didn't have it yet. It wasn't because they had downloading of movies. They didn't have that yet either. It wasn't because they had a studio that produced blockbuster-style hits. They didn't have that yet either. Netflix dethroned Blockbuster on one key feature, and it wasn't speed, and it wasn't larger selection. It was the idea that you would never pay late fees. If you had to wait for the movie, didn't matter. You would never pay late fees. And that's what crushed Blockbuster. Blockbuster factored into their business how much they would make on late fees. Late fees were good for the margins because it's just free money. And they counted on people not, just like the gym counts on selling 140% of their capacity and subscriptions, knowing that, or memberships, knowing that a certain percent are never going to show up, a certain percent will show up once in a while, and that basically the hardcore users will only be 20%. So they know how many, and they count on that. They count on people not showing up. That's how they make their money. Blockbuster, same thing, but customers don't like that, and customers fled Blockbuster once they realized that they weren't going to have to pay $30 in late fees because their roommate, their wife, their husband, significant other left a few VHS tapes or DVDs lying around a little too long. It's the same thing with Bitcoin versus PayPal and even Visa, and that's why Visa is probably smart to try to incorporate Bitcoin into the Visa payment system because Visa fees, PayPal fees are too high. No one wants that. As I mentioned, just personally, when I receive Patreon or Subscribestar or PayPal donations, a simple $5 donation, I get $4.33. That is a massive amount for a payment processor to take. And so if I get a donation directly into my wallet of Bitcoin or Litecoin, I get the whole thing, minus a tiny pennies or two, a mining fee. But if you send, even if you send Bitcoin or Litecoin through a payment processor, still very much, I get almost the full $5. So I think eventually, once customers and especially merchants realize that there is an advantage to using cryptocurrencies or accepting cryptocurrencies, they can avoid the fee. So on that quick example I gave, when I get $5, I'm losing 13%. Your donation, in part, you're making a 13% donation to the payment processor, whether it is PayPal, Patreon, or Subscribestar. I'm not complaining, but I can see, and I like all donations, but obviously I would like to get, just as the merchants would like to get, the full amount of money that the person donating or the person who's purchasing the products is willing to pay. So if I'm selling a lamp for $27, I hope to get $27. More importantly, if I'm selling a mug for $18, I want to get $18. I want the Smaulgld mug value. I don't want to get $16.38. I want $18. And if I can come up with a way of doing that, in fact, I even offer discounts if you want to pay with Litecoin or Bitcoin, because I'll get the more money and I can split the processing fee with you, or even just give it to you. And still I make the sale, and I'm no worse off than if I had given the money in processing fees to PayPal. That was half a sales pitch for the mugs. We'll get to the sales pitch for mugs later. Here's Bakkt again. Bakkt Futures Exchange hires PayPal Google vet as product chief. So we're seeing lots of big players, lots of big money moving in. Now we still got the pumping and dumping going on in the space. Here is CNBC. It is Brian Kelly. He's always out there. I don't know what he was. New highs by this time next year, 2 years from now, easily past 20,000. He's got no problems making that prediction. What's this one here? Now, this happened. Newsflash. This says like 15 hours ago. Price spikes within inches of 5,500 despite China FUD. That's a big cryptocurrency word. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And yet, soon after this article was published, the price of Bitcoin tumbled down to 4,900. So it's definitely a volatile asset there. Now then you get on the other side, everyone calling it bubbles, tulips, and bubbles. But here's one they keep saying that Bitcoin is done. Bitcoin, a mania is a mania. When it pops for good. Well, that's true if it's a mania. But the difference is NASDAQ bubble popped back in 2000. It's 3 times higher than it was then. Bitcoin, Litecoin, and silver have all seen multiple parabolic rises. You know, I call silver the spike in dive metal, and Bitcoin and Litecoin we have had 3 or 4 parabolic rises. The most recent one was to 20,000. So I don't agree that, well, it's true. If something is a true bubble, it goes up, it goes down, and then it's done forever. But I think that Bitcoin, Litecoin, silver, and NASDAQ, they're not really bubbles. Those are just cycles within a volatile asset class or a volatile exchange. NASDAQ will collapse again one day. Bitcoin, Litecoin will collapse again. Silver will collapse, already has. But I think silver at some point will have another big spike one day. I think Bitcoin and Litecoin will. I think the NASDAQ will have a collapse and then within a certain period of time spike right back up. I think that is the difference between a bubble, well, like Beanie Babies or tulips, where they never come back again, than there is between NASDAQ, Bitcoin, Litecoin, silver, and other assets. Uranium, rhodium, they go through those types of things too. Palladium is most recently. Now, regulation. We're seeing New York offering more bit licenses. Bitstamp got a bit license. Now they're going to operate in New York and expand their crypto services in the U.S. I think they're from like Slovakia or Slovenia or Czech Republic, somewhere in Central Europe. And they're also located in the United Kingdom. And now they'll be able, with this license, to do business in New York and elsewhere in the U.S. Mauritius is not the most important crypto hub, but their Financial Service Commission has clarified the rules applying to projects launching security tokens. We're seeing in the Philippines, same thing. You've got central bank already legalized 10 Bitcoin exchanges. This idea that all the governments are going to be against it, they see the value in it, not because the reason people think they're going to shut it down is the same reason that the anarcho-capitalists and the Bitcoin maximalists think that all you need is Bitcoin and that Bitcoin is going to replace the dollar. Okay, that's on one side. On the other side are the people who are saying, well, then they're going to shut it down. Yeah, if Bitcoin was some type of threat to end central banking and to destroy the entire payment system, well, then they try to shut it down. And then they get in the argument, can they shut it down? They can't shut it down. It's anti-resistant, anti-fragile. You get all these arguments, but I don't even think we're heading in either of those two directions. I think what's happening is, under the watchful eye of regulators and taxing authorities and criminal money laundering prosecutions and so on, that all this is being wrapped into the general financial system. And we also see, Tulsi Gabbard is running for president. She's a congressperson. There's Warren Davidson, another representative. They've introduced the Token Taxonomy Act, and that would exempt certain cryptocurrencies from securities laws. So a lot is happening, and the SEC looks like they're very favorable on crypto. They just want to make sure that they have the right regulations in place to protect investors so they know what type of exchanges the Bitcoin is going to trade on. That'll be subject to the ETF. But Chairman's speech suggests crypto remains a priority for SEC. And we're going to get more, I believe, clarity in this consensus conference in New York next month when we have a couple of congressmen and New York assemblymen will also be speaking there as well. There's a story about Tulsi Gabbard. She's co-sponsoring this bill. Now, Tulsi Gabbard and Grassley both listed on their financial disclosure forms that they own Bitcoin and Litecoin. So you have people in government that are hodlers, so to speak. Now, one more thing here, just a data point. Now, Bloomberg said, they just make these headlines up. Once home to 70% of Bitcoin mining, China plans to ban crypto mining altogether. Something that we discussed the other day. But then in the story, they mention this in addition to waning interest. Now, what's interesting is that's not true. Again, this is why I like to look at the numbers. There's not waning interest. They showed that the CME group had record futures volume in the last 3 weeks. Also, transactions and active wallets on the Bitcoin blockchain are near all-time highs, and Bitcoin just crossed a huge milestone, and that milestone was 400 million transactions. So I like to look at data. I don't like to read these generalities. Sometimes people, when they use generalities, they may have been true 7 months ago, 2 years ago, 17 years ago, but you always have to update your data, I believe. All right, now let's take a look at some of these interesting statements by Secretary Treasury Mnuchin, Kudlow, and also what the ECB did. Now, the ECB had their announcement, Mario Draghi, the other day. No changes. So the ECB is going to keep, as Janet Yellen would say, highly accommodative monetary policy. They are not going to take their foot off the pedal. Draghi says, according to Jonathan Ferro, the ECB will consider negative rates if they need them. So, doesn't look like central banks are interested in tightening up. And Goldman Sachs comes out and says they don't think there's a risk of the recession over the next year. It used to be 20% under their models. Now they say it's only 10%. So you got Goldman versus the yield curve. I'm not a big believer in that theory. I know I think it's less of a correlation, more of a I don't think it's a causation that when you have the inverted yield curve that you're necessarily going to get a recession in X number of months down the line. Larry Kudlow, today, Fed may not raise interest rates in my lifetime. Now, the Fed has said in their most recent pronouncements, they think there'll be a rate hike, one rate hike next year. Now, that's down from a couple this year and a few more next year, but they haven't changed their view that they might raise rates, or they should raise rates at some point in 2020. But Kudlow and Trump have been on the warpath, saying they don't want interest rates, they should be cutting interest rates. And let's see what the Fed said in the recent minutes here. Even here, the Fed doesn't know whether its next move is going to be a hike or a cut. And they're grappling with significant uncertainties, persistently low inflation. See, that low inflation means that they might want to have room to cut them even more. But the slowing economy, they say, if the economy is going higher, they may want to raise rates. That, like they say, they don't know what they're doing. And it's because they raise them in such small increments. Even though they do that, they don't really know what's going to happen because there is a lag effect on interest rates. And the Fed is notorious for raising rates well into a recession, meaning that they've raised them, and then when the numbers come out finally for the 2 quarters, they realize they had raised rates during the first quarter of a recession. And they start raising them. I start lowering them again. But here's an interesting one. Secretary Treasury Mnuchin says he doesn't see the U.S. returning to a gold standard. Well, that's not a surprise, even if you get Herman Cain, former Kansas City Fed chair, and Stephen Moore, a big proponent of a commodity standard. Even if those two were to get in, and it's not a slam dunk that either of them will get in or both of them will get in. There's just not a lot of Fed members that are in favor or even thinking about a gold standard. So I can understand Secretary Treasury Mnuchin saying doesn't expect it. Now, let's talk about William Barr and his game-changing testimony to the Senate and the Congress the last couple of days. I don't think that the Congress or the Senate was prepared for this, what he said, and they're still reacting to it. And indeed, you'll see in a minute, the congressman from Hawaii said, after he heard Barr saying that he wanted to look into the spying on the Trump campaign in 2016 to see if there was a predicate for it, he said, you're going to freak out the cable news ecosystem. You're sure you want to say that? So we're going to take a look now, some of the things he said, and then we're going to take a look at some of the strategies that have been employed. And frankly, it was I don't want to use the word game changer because that's what all of these pumpers like to say, but it did, what Barr did turn the tables. It 180 degrees on where the whole push was. So Barr was showing up, Attorney General Barr, for his, I believe that the Department of Justice makes an annual presentation to Congress about what they need in the way of budget, because the Congress, they control the purse strings. And that was the purpose of him being there. But the Democrats decided that, well, yeah, that's fine. We'll talk about that. But what we really want to talk about is the Mueller report. We don't like the fact that we don't have the Mueller report yet. We are concerned that there's stuff in there that is very damaging to the president and that you're some kind of cover-up man, hatchet man for the president. And we want to know what's in the Mueller report. And we don't necessarily trust your 4-page summary. Now, Barr went on to say, first of all, he said, I didn't attempt to summarize it. All I did was highlighted the major conclusions of the report. And he went on to say and explain numerous times that he's going to have a report ready for public consumption and for the Congress and the Senate sometime next week. And in that report, there will be redactions. And there are redactions required by law or to cover up confidential information. And the grand jury, I think it's called Section E materials, have to be by law redacted because you cannot disclose grand jury testimony. And there's a reason for that, is when somebody testifies before the grand jury, they don't have a lawyer with them. And if no one is charged and a lot of damaging information comes out, but it's really nothing to do with rising to the level of a crime, it could just be embarrassing information, that's why you're not allowed to put that information out in the public. So Barr can't just deliver an unredacted report. Now, the reason they want the unredacted report is, I don't think because they think that Barr has just invented the conclusions of Bob Mueller. In fact, that's definitely not the case, because Mueller would have already spoken up and said, no, he mischaracterized the report because I found that I wanted to indict him on these two things. That's not what happened. But what Barr can only do is present the report in the form that is properly redacted, but the Congress and the senators are asking for it in its unredacted form. Well, that's not going to happen. They're going to get the report properly redacted. And then he also said, Barr said, if you have issues about things that you want to see, then we'll look into how, if it makes sense and there's a legitimate reason to see these things, we'll try to get those to you. And they have ways of presenting confidential information, probably not the grand jury testimonies, but they can get certain confidential information, top secret stuff shown, because there are people that have security clearances in the Congress and the Senate, and they bring them into a room, and they don't get to take pictures, they don't get to take notes, they can go in, they can read the materials. So he's offered to do something along that nature, but they have decided that somehow, even though Bob Mueller had 500 interviewees, subpoenas, 19 attorneys, worked on it for 2 years, that somehow, I don't know, they missed something that should rise to the level of damaging enough that they can impeach Trump. They can't second guess the prosecutor now and say, no, he should have been prosecuted. It says in a report on page 236, he said this or this happened. Why don't we reopen the investigation? That's not going to happen, because they already determined they're not going to go after Trump for Russian collusion, because they said they didn't have any. They didn't see any evidence of it. Now, what they're hoping to do, it seems, is find something in the report that evidences that, or that makes a case that he tweeted 3 times too many, that it was a witch hunt and therefore it's obstruction of justice. Strategically, it's not really the brightest thing to be doing, because the Senate and the Congress cannot do an investigation at the same level as a special counsel. I mean, those are professional people. In fact, they had every reason to want to find dirt on Trump and find Russian collusion and nail him for obstruction of justice. The lawyers that were, you had a lawyer from the Clinton Foundation, you had lawyers that were very aggressively against Trump, and they didn't find anything. So aggressive congressmen and senators without subpoena power, it's just, well, they have subpoena power, but they have no prosecutorial power. So I'm not sure why it makes sense to continue along this vein. So back to where we are, Barr shows up. He's there to talk about, I need X amount of money for the opioid crisis, X amount of money for the border, whatever he's going to ask for. And then there's senators and congressmen that have their own interest, and they want certain things, like up in Alaska looked into Murkowski, and I think Jeanne Shaheen wanted some money for some, anyway, in New Hampshire. But they decided they really wanted to push him on the report, and he kept saying, I'm not going to talk about the report. We'll talk about the report next week after you've had a chance to look at it. But it just seemed that they just kept pushing him and pushing him. And at one point during the proceeding, we're going to play you a couple of clips, he said he thinks there was spying that occurred during the 2016 Trump campaign. Now, that's not because he has any superior district of attorney, U.S. attorney general insight. We know there was spying on the Trump campaign. That's why we know there were FISA warrants, and they were granted in order to spy on members of the Trump campaign. And that's factual. I don't even know why that is of interest, but of course, when he said that, that's when the tables turned, because he no longer was there to be browbeated over There's got to be something in that Mueller report. There's got to be something in there that you're hiding. There's got to be something in there, and we're going to find it, and you better give it to us. Turned out to, well, what do you mean? And I'm going to play you a couple of clips where you can see Gene Shaheen. We won't be able to see it. I'll leave a link. You know, if you go to the Smaulgld site, I put a good portion of what we talk about. I put the links in there and the charts, and you can see them a lot better. And he said that he was going to form a team to review the FBI decisions that were taken during the probe of the Trump campaign in 2016. And this was kind of sprung on them, and they weren't really expecting it. And they were thinking that that they were just going to browbeat him the whole time about what is he hiding, what's going to happen. Well, let's play the couple of clips of what happened, and then what the immediate reaction was, and then what the reaction's been for the last day or two. All right. So we're going to play a clip here where Gene Shaheen, senator from New Hampshire, says something like, I heard you want to look into this, what happened and why they were, you know, looking into the Trump campaign. And have a listen here.
Not public office holders.
Thank you. News just broke today that you have a special team looking into why the FBI opened an investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 elections. I wonder if you can share with this committee who's on that team, why you felt a need to form that kind of a team, and what you intend to be the scope of their investigation.
Yeah, as I said in my confirmation hearing, I am going to be reviewing both the genesis and the conduct of intelligence activities directed at the Trump campaign during 2016. A lot has already been a lot of this has already been investigated, and a substantial portion of it has been investigated and is being investigated by the Office of Inspector General at the department. But one of the things I want to do is pull together all the information from the various investigations that have gone on, including on the Hill and in the department, and see if there are any remaining questions to be addressed.
And can you share with us why you feel a need to do that?
Well, you know,
this is where the tables turned. She is saying, well, why do you have to do that? Now it's his job. They are not expecting him to flip the tables here. He knows what's in the Mueller report. He knows that this is a dead horse. There's nothing there. They may have lingering questions. They might want to know about the process, about how they came to the conclusion that they came to. He's already past that. He wants to know, how did they spend all this time to find absolutely nothing? He knows that there's a potential that there was a setup. And here's the most interesting thing. We might as well talk about it now with the narratives. If you've listened to the news for the past 2 years, they have only gone in one direction. And when you have an issue, there's usually at least two sides. The only thing they've ever reported on was what potential information might have just been released that would prove or show Russian collusion. Now, there's been information out there for 2 or 3 years that it's possible that the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Justice set up people in the Trump campaign in order to create collusion with Russia. And there has been no reporting on that, even though there's been ample evidence, at least, to pursue that line of journalistic inquiry. And so what you have here is they've never pursued the possibility that the DOJ or the FBI or the CIA acted improperly. Now, what's interesting is, immediately now that their narrative hasn't turned out to be true about Russian collusion, they immediately suspect that the DOJ is doing some dirty business. That's what they are accusing Barr of, that he's covering everything up. And the reason for that is they have reported on and believed a narrative without ever considering that it's possible that maybe there's nothing to the story. That never entered their mind. It's the same when you say the gold-silver ratio should be 1-to-1. It should be 9-to-1 because of, and whatever you've been repeating for 5 years or 3 years or 2 years. Never stopping to think, what if this story isn't true? Now, certain stories, it's hard to believe, or you convince yourself it's hard to believe, that it isn't true. But if you want to believe something is true, like the gold-silver ratio should be 9-to-1, and all you hear are the silly reasons why it should be 9-to-1, then you do believe it. And when you hear something else, you no, that's not true. No, doesn't he understand? And that's what happened at these Congressional and Senate meetings with Barr. They weren't ready or even willing to hear that Barr wasn't really interested in turning over some type of damaging material that would prove Russian collusion or obstruction of justice. His concern is, why were they doing this in the first place? And did they have a proper predicate to do this? Were the FISA warrants properly authorized and issued? Now, I don't know the answer to those questions, but if I was a journalist, I would look at that too. They never look there. They never talk there. They call that conspiracy. And that's what they're doing today. They're saying that to go down that line of inquiry is some type of tin hat. Well, what's funny is that it turned out that the Russian conspiracy story was the tin hat conspiracy. So generally, when you find out that what had been hyped for 2 years, I would think it's only natural for the Attorney General to want to go back and say, why did you, if this was such a big deal and you invested all this time and effort in, why did you think there was some type of Russian collusion in the first place? Anyway, that's where he is, and we're going to continue now with his answer.
For the same reason we're worried about foreign influence in elections. We want to make sure that during election, I think spying on a political campaign is a big deal.
Boom. What he was saying, and you heard him say it, spying on a political campaign is a big deal. But just before that, he said, if we're concerned about interference in our elections from Russians, he was essentially saying we should be concerned about interference in our election from the FBI and the Department of Justice spying on a political campaign.
It's a big deal.
And he says it's a big deal. And now Jeanne Shaheen, who would wanted to browbeat him over what he's hiding in the Mueller report, she doesn't know what to say. Well, watch when he finishes speaking.
Generation I grew up in, which was the Vietnam War period, people were all concerned about spying on anti-war people and so forth by the government. And there were a lot of rules put in place to make sure that there's an adequate basis before our law enforcement agencies get involved in political surveillance. I'm not suggesting that those rules were violated, but I think it's important to look at that. And I'm not talking about the FBI necessarily, but
okay. And what he does here is brilliant because he's trying to avoid a confrontation, because you can see what Jeanne Shaheen wants to do is to say, how dare you? How could you possibly say they were spying? What he's saying is, I'm just saying that we know they were spying, and I'm not even saying that we know whether there wasn't a predicate for it. I just need to check that.
Intelligence agencies more broadly.
And then he says, what he just said was, he doesn't think it's an issue that I have to go and investigate the entire FBI. He's signaling that, and he even says it in the upcoming minute, that there were specific individuals that probably did things illegally.
So you're not suggesting, though, that spying occurred?
No, he is suggesting that.
I don't, I guess you could, I think spying did occur. Yes, I think spying did occur.
Well, let me...
But the question is whether it was adequately predicated.
Did you hear? Well, she didn't know what to say. And he was smart to help her out and say, but I'm not sure whether it was properly predicated, but we'll take a look at that.
And I'm not suggesting it wasn't adequately predicated, but I need to explore that. I think it's my obligation. Congress is usually very concerned about intelligence agencies and law enforcement agencies staying in their proper lane. And
how could she argue with that rationally? That we just want to make sure that they did everything properly. She can't argue with them.
And I want to make sure that happened. We have a lot of rules about that. And I want to say that I've said I'm reviewing this. I haven't set up a team yet, but I have in mind having some colleagues help me pull all this information together and let me know whether there's some areas that should be looked at. And I also want to make clear, this is not launching an investigation of the FBI. Frankly, I'm
Okay, it sounded like he was saying he's not launching an investigation. No, he said he's not launching an investigation into the FBI in general. A lot of people heard him say, I'm not launching an investigation. Like, oh, then what are you doing? Here's what he says after.
To the extent there were any issues at the FBI, I do not view it as a problem that's endemic to the FBI.
Just contradicted himself. He said he wasn't suggesting that there wasn't a proper predicate, and then he just said to the extent that there were issues, it wasn't across the FBI, it was with specific individuals.
I think there was probably a failure among a group of leaders there at the upper echelon, and so I don't like to hear attacks about the FBI because I think the FBI is an outstanding organization, and I think Chris Wray is a great partner for me. I'm very pleased that he's there as the director, and if it becomes necessary to look over some former officials' activities, I expect that I'll be relying heavily on Chris and
Clapper, Brennan, Strzok, Page, Comey.
Work closely with him in looking at that information. But that's what I'm doing. I feel I have an obligation to make sure that government power is not abused. I mean, I think that's one of the principal roles of the Attorney General.
I certainly agree. I think we all.
So she had to agree, but you should see her face. I'll leave the link. You can check it out tomorrow. She's dumbfounded because she planned on browbeating him, and now she's like on defense, but she doesn't have one yet. And he hasn't told her that he's doing anything that requires a defense. All she could say is, but why do you want to do that? Then, this guy from Hawaii jumps in, and he's concerned that, did I hear what I heard, that you think there's some type of spying going on and that you need to look at that? Is that right? You don't mean that. Do you?
Questions of others.
Do you want to like rephrase that from it? Do you really think there was spying? And listen to what Barr says.
Do you want to rephrase what you're doing? Because I think the word spying could cause everybody in the cable news ecosystem to freak out. And I think it's necessary for you to be precise with your language here. You normally are, and I want to give you a chance to be as cable news ecosystem to freak out. And I think it's necessary for you to be precise with your language here. You normally are, and I want to give you a chance to be especially precise here.
I'm not sure of all the connotations of that word that you're referring to, but unauthorized surveillance. I want to make sure there was no unauthorized surveillance.
Okay, thank you.
Is that more appropriate in your mind?
This is your call. I really did want to give you a chance to say it how you wanted to say it and make sure that you didn't misspeak, because you talked for a long time. You had yesterday, and I want to make sure that you use the words that you want to use.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the old "say it ain't so, Joe." Like you didn't really, because they had no defense. They didn't know what to say. You didn't really mean to say that this thing is now going to be looking at the predicates for why there was an investigation or surveillance on the Trump campaign in the first. You're not really saying that. They're still kind of in shock over that. And then Flimsy Graham jumps in and calls out Dianne Feinstein and asked a very pertinent question about if they thought there was some type of Russian interference in the Trump campaign, why didn't they notify him?
Do you agree with me that every American should be concerned as to whether or not a warrant was obtained against an American citizen with unverified information?
Absolutely. I think, the Fourth Amendment is one of our most cherished civil liberties.
So you think that's an appropriate thing to look at, and you will look at it?
Yes.
Okay. Do you share my concern that if you're going to open up a counterintelligence investigation against a presidential candidate, that you have to have a very good reason?
Yes, absolutely.
And a counterintelligence investigation is designed to protect the target of foreign influence. Is that correct?
That is correct.
It's not a prosecutorial function, is it?
No, unless espionage or some violation of espionage laws develops.
So would it be odd that the candidate was never really briefed by the Department of Justice that your campaign may be targeted by a foreign entity?
That is one of the questions I have. I feel normally the campaign would have been advised of this.
Okay.
Now that smacks of a setup, that they're infiltrating his campaign and they're not telling him about it, and then there's evidence that could lead people to believe that they tried to interject people into the campaign who could then contact Russians. Now, you can say, well, that's ridiculous, but it is worth looking into. Instead of just looking at, there had to be, see, when people start with the narrative, there had to be Russian collusion, and that's what they're doing now, and we're going to find it. Mueller didn't find it, but you give us that report, all 400 pages, we will find the Russian collusion. And Barr is saying, in response to Flimsy Graham, that why were you operating perhaps in that fashion? Why didn't you tell the Trump campaign that there might have been an issue? And here's where Flimsy calls out Feinstein.
And can you think of a good reason right now why they wouldn't have been?
I'm interested in getting that answer. They had two former U.S. attorneys, in Chris Christie and Rudy Giuliani, involved in the campaign, and I don't understand why the campaign was not advised.
Apparently, when Senator Feinstein had a person on her staff that was supposedly connected to the Chinese government, she was briefed. Is that the normal way you do things with a counterintelligence investigation?
I think...
Well, she was briefed about a staff member that they thought might be connected to the Chinese government, and she took action and fired the guy. Is that sort of what you're supposed to be doing?
That's what I would, if I were Attorney General and that situation came up, I would say, yes, brief the target of the foreign espionage activity.
Okay. So you're pledging to this committee, and I guess to the country as a whole, is to find out what happened with the warrant application, find out about the counterintelligence investigation, to make sure that the law was followed, and if there was any abuse of the law, to report to the Congress and the public. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. I just, want to satisfy myself that there were no abuse of law enforcement or intelligence power.
Which means he suspects, or he already knows, that there was. Now let's move on from this and see what the quick reaction was to all of this. So Nancy Pelosi, she described it as House Speaker says Attorney General Barr is going off the rails. She's a bit of shock here because she wants to attack him for covering up the Mueller report, and he's meanwhile saying, I want to look into the genesis of the Mueller report. Chuck Schumer said, Barr admitted he had no evidence to support his claim that spying in the Trump campaign did occur. Now, he didn't say that. He didn't say he had no evidence that they were spying. He said he had no evidence that there wasn't a predicate for spying on the Trump campaign. And then he says, Barr must retract his statement immediately or produce specific evidence to back it up. That's not even in doubt that there was spying on the Trump campaign. You may call it surveillance. He changed it to unauthorized surveillance. Was the surveillance properly predicated with a proper warrant that they presented to the FISA judge? That's all. Perpetuating conspiracy theories is beneath the office of the Attorney General. This is just political stuff. You can see it on both sides all the time. no one's really interested in what actually happened. We already covered that one. And then Trump weighed in. I think we got one more thing on this. Yes, Trump weighs in. I'm not going to play the clip, but I'll leave it in tomorrow's notes. He said that McCabe and Comey were dirty cops, and this was an attempted coup. This was an attempted takedown of the president, and we beat them, and I hope somebody looks into this. All right, let's move on from the Barr thing, and the latest on Brexit, well, I call it no exit, because now they've extended. We're leaving the European Union on March 29th, full stop, full stop, she kept saying. And Britain will leave the European Union on March 29th, full stop. Theresa May, and now there's an extension, flexible extension until 31st October. It's not going to happen. At least that's my view. Full stop does not mean full stop. It means comma, period, new paragraph, something else. Julian Assange was arrested, and I don't know all the details, but one of the questions I have, he's going to be extradited. My question is, will he testify where he got the Podesta and DNC emails? Will that be part of a plea deal? Now remember, they determined that Russia hacked the DNC. The FBI determined that, not because they examined the server, but because a third party security service or software service that was working for the Clinton campaign, the DNC, said that that's what they had determined, and then they just passed their information over to the FBI. They never looked at it. And the question is, who stole the DNC emails? Was it Seth Rich? Was it a Russian actor? Who knows who it was? And how did WikiLeaks get them? Now, WikiLeaks or Assange was asked, did you get them from Russia? He said he didn't get them from a Russian actor. Maybe someone on his staff did. We don't know. But the question is, once he's arraigned, I would imagine they should want to get him under some questioning. All right. China car sales down big time. China car slump persists with sales plunging for the 10th month. Things are not going well in China. They just don't have enough debt, I suppose, to overcome this economic slowdown. But that's not stopping them from slowing down their surveillance. Chinese cops send people to concentration camps that they're found with Facebook on their phones during random stop and searches. Shocking. Pictures claim to show life inside China's terrifying police state. But they have gold and Sun Tzu. All right. Here's a very interesting story on no debt. College costs. It's interesting. I guess it's a free market way. This woman has not taken out a college loan, but rather she has agreed with a group of creditors. They'll pay for her college, and she will pay them a part of her future earnings. And those earnings could be Starbucks earnings, or they could be CEO earnings. That is the risk that, or she could be unemployed. That is the risk that the lenders will make. So if she makes minimum wage for 10 years, they're not going to do very well. If she becomes a CEO, multinational corporation, and makes $10, $20 million a year, they're going to do quite well. It's going to pay for her entire life. If she decides, I used to be ambitious, but now I want to be a beach bum, she goes to college for free, and they never get their money. I don't know if we'll see a lot more of that, but it is an interesting way of funding college. Quick note here. I don't know if you guys heard that PewDiePie, and I don't watch him, but he is the largest YouTube person. He is switching over to a platform called DTube, and it has live streaming on it. And Smaulgld has signed up for it. I haven't used it yet. It's called DLive. You can just go to dlive.tv/Smaulgld, and you can sign up there. We've got a couple of... I'm hoping to be able to use that. Maybe I won't have the interruptions I have here on YouTube, and we already have 2 Smaulgld mug stackers have joined up, Prashanti Girl and De La Ville. They're following Smaulgld over on DLive. Before we get to Moronica and our silver story, let's talk about mugs. Now, wouldn't you know it, we now have a copycat. Silver Doctors enters the mug space. There's our friend James Henry Anderson. This guy, me. Your mug domination days are numbered. And there is what I would think is a semi-unattractive black mug compared to the Smaulgld super classic mug. But, everyone has their own taste, and the vagaries of taste. You'll never know. Now, I think, however, we have the first mover advantage, which is what I told James Henry Anderson. And, of course, I had to do a quick poll on this, who likes which mug the best. And let's take a look at the Twitter poll. And that was nice. I didn't just say Smaulgld or SD mug. I said, which do you prefer, the Smaulgld mug or the SD bullion mug, or do you love them both? And our diplomatic friends, 38% said they love them both. 62% said they love the Smaulgld mug. And no one said they like the SD bullion mug best. Now let's move over to the YouTube poll. And a very similar comment here. 8 votes. Not very many votes yet. 62% said they prefer the Smaulgld Super Classic mug. 38% said they love them both. And no one picked this SD bullion mug. All right. And now I believe it is time for Moronica. Uh-oh, we got a moron here.
Presenting the distinguished international news commentator and foreign correspondent,
Smaulgld. This has been an extraordinary week in world affairs.
No, I told Hillary Clinton that that's moronic.
And guess who's the subject of it tonight? Bernie Sanders. Now, Bernie Sanders, I didn't know this. He has not released his tax returns during the last presidential campaign, and he hasn't released them yet, and he's decided he's going to have to release them. But he's a little concerned that his tax returns are going to show that he's one of the millionaires and billionaires that he rails against. So he's doing a little preparation. He's doing a little preparation before he releases his tax returns to let people realize what they're going to see. Everyone knows he has 3 houses, but, you can forgive Uncle Bernie for having a little dwelt. But apparently what's in there, it's going to show some significant income from selling books. So he said,
I wrote a best-selling book. If you write a best-selling book, you can be a millionaire too. Millionaires and billionaires, a nation of book writers that don't wait in line for the food, that the rich are hoarding, and the poor are starving to death. And that's why I wrote a book, because books can make money.
Yeah, well, the problem with all this is he's not supposed to be making a lot of money. What is he, selling the American dream? Anyone can write a book and become a millionaire or a billionaire. So we'll see how that one goes, but I'm not sure that's going to help him by telling people all you got to do is write a book, because the obvious retort to that is, why'd you have to charge so much for your book? So he's looking to cash in. I don't know what's in his book. I don't know what book he wrote, but can you really become a millionaire writing a book? I should get to writing one myself instead of doing cap in hand for a few Bitcoin and Litecoin donations on a YouTube stream. All right, now let's get into, what might make sense, and I think you guys will agree. Let's cut the stream here now and start fresh on the silver supply and demand. I think we'd be much better off. I'll rename this. Why don't we come back at 8:30 in 20 minutes and do just the silver, so this way when it gets put up as a standalone video, people aren't going to have to wait an hour and 10 minutes to get to the top story. So I'll rename this video something else, and we'll start with the silver in about 20 minutes.